Hello and welcome to Between Sets with Church. If you've been to a concert at Molson's Park or even Maple Leaf Gardens in the 80s and 90s, there's probably a good chance today's guest shot those great gigs. His name, Mr. Wayne Doyle. Welcome to the show, Wayne.
Hi, Ian. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for finally getting together and we were able to do this.
It's been a long time. I'm so thrilled that you even asked me to be a part of this.
My honor, my honor. We go back quite a few years, actually. High school, then college together, and
more years than either of us should probably remember.
Yeah. We'll end up,
or could remember.
We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your early days when you went from Georgian and you somehow morphed into the Barrie Examiner. Now, knowing what you took at Georgian, how did you get into working with the Barrie Examiner as a photographer journalist?
It's a great question, and one that's really, it's just luck. That's really all it was. I guess karma, fortune, whatever it might be, who knows. I studied civil and resources engineering technology in school, so how I ended up working in writing and photography is beyond most people. But I think what happened was I was elected chairman of the Arts Council, Barrie Arts Council, in like '85 or something. And we organized a show for City Hall. And it ran into a little bit of a conflict with the mayor at the time, who found a couple of the pieces offensive, and he censored the show. So there was a bit of a brouhaha about that. And I ended up doing a whole bunch of media, right, like As It Happens and CBC and all that stuff about art censorship. So Mariposa just happened to be in town, and they hired me to help them do media relations because apparently I knew something about that. So I was working with them, and I was doing a story, or pitching a story on Mariposa to the Examiner, and the woman who was the entertainment editor at the time, Kathy Stundon Hall, kind of laughed and said, you know, we knew that you did the art thing, and now you're doing the music thing. Would you be interested in working with us covering arts and entertainment? And I said, well, doing what? And she said, well, you know, writing about it and covering it. Yeah, sure, why not, right? And that's really how it started. It was just one conversation. I had an interest and a passion for the stuff, and I guess Kathy saw that and offered me a gig. So I started off writing record reviews and doing the local club scene, you know, who was coming up, and interviewing the bands that were doing that sort of thing.
Going back to that era, the scene that was going on, what were you shooting locally? Was there stuff going on at the Rocks? I remember like the Clifton was alive at that time. And
at that time.
Were you shooting at all those clubs as well?
Oh, yeah. The Clifton was happening. The Rocks was a going concern. I guess at that time there was still shows going on at Georgian College Theater. There was a place, I can't remember what it was called. It ended up, it's called Jimmy G's now or something, Gibby G's. It's a breakfast place. It used to be a club, the Limelight.
Oh, yeah, the Limelight
was there.
Yes.
And I remember seeing FM with Nash the Slash there. And they were just, I mean, it was priceless. They were brilliant. Their version of Kashmir still rings in my head.
That's crazy.
And that's like 35 years ago, right?
Yeah, and they also played at the Rocks as well, just prior to that.
Yeah, the Tragically Hip. Played the Rocks. I think it was '89. There were all of like 24 people showed up. It was a great show, though. I mean, the guys were just rocking right from the beginning. Other great shows. Jerry Doucette playing at the Clifton.
Wow.
Ian Hunter. Like Ian Hunter playing at the Clifton, right? You just kind of shaking your head.
Those are some great names. I don't remember that. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah. I remember shooting them and interviewing them before the shows, either by radio or that afternoon before they play. And some of the talent that came through this city was amazing. I remember I interviewed Mick Taylor. You know, Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones. He was playing Molson Park. He was on a double bill with Joe Walsh. I had an interview with Walsh lined up at the venue, but he had fallen into the back of a limo after a beer or too many. So that kind of ended that deal. But yeah, interviewing Mick Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy.
You know, the Barrie Examiner is interviewing probably the greatest Stones guitarist ever, right?
Yeah.
No disrespect to Keith, but when you look at Stones guitar players, yeah, I would think Mick Taylor is certainly above what Keith does on a regular basis. I mean, he's playing a solo show up here. And we chatted on the phone, you know, probably a good hour and a half. And it was like, I think the first question out of my pie hole was, you know, well, how do you feel about leaving the Stones now?
Yeah,
right,
that's crazy.
30 years later, the biggest band in the world, and they have been for so many years, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was it was all an opportunity, and most of it just by happenstance, just by working at the Barrie Examiner and having Molson Park just down the street, right? It was the local venue.
Yeah, I want to get into a little bit about talking about Molson Park because obviously for many of our viewers who are new to Barrie, they may not know about the existence of Molson Park and the brewery and who has played there. Oh, actually, it's almost a case of who has not played there.
That's true.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I remember the first CFNY. I think it was $1 pizza and CFNY put on it. And it was basically all Canadian.
Yeah.
Were you shooting at that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
What memories do you have of that? That what you'd like to reflect upon?
Oh, I have tons of memories from the CFNY days. I mean, most of them are kind of muddled together, but it was a great promotion, right? Like Molson Park had just started a couple of years prior to that, and to drive the attendance, they put together the CFNY 102.1 day. Tickets were $1 too.
That's right,
available through Pizza.
Yeah.
And I can remember, like I say, I can't remember specifically any of the one because there were so many of them. Every July 1st for about 4 or 5 years, I think.
Yeah, there was a few.
But what I remember from not just the bands, I mean, there was 5440, there was The Pursuit of Happiness, there was the Northern Pikes, right? A lot of Teenage Head,
Blue Rodeo
many times, The Hip a few times.
Yeah, Blue Peter, I believe, was on the bill.
Blue Peter was probably on one or two.
Yeah.
Anybody who would have been popular in Canadian music that would have been getting tracked on CFNY at the time, which was alternative radio at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. So going back to Molson's Park, which was such an iconic venue for this place, what memories do you have, or what was some of the standout moments that you have from that era?
Oh, I've got lots of them. From the days of CFNY. I remember one year they had a CFNY Radio All-Star softball team play the music industry Wankies. And I ended up playing on the Wankies team with a guy named Gord Gano from the Violent Femmes, who were incredibly popular at the time. And me and Gord had been sipping a couple of Crown Royals before the game, and maybe indulging in some other things that we can't talk about, but Gord gets on to first base, and I come up after him, and Gord turns and says, hey, there's a box of Crown in the dressing room that if you get me in, it's yours. Sure, okay. Like I'm going to be able to hit the ball. End up actually hitting the ball really far, and Gord scored. So I walked home with a case of Crown, which was quite a wonderful gift. Thanks very much, CFNY. Other great memories, I mean, hanging out with John Prine during Mariposa was just an absolute treat. Great memory during Mariposa. It was the...
Lollapalooza.
No, it was actually, there were so many great festivals there, they sometimes blend together.
That's true.
There was, in '89, they did the 20th anniversary of Woodstock.
Okay.
And they had a lot of the same performers from the original, which kind of made sense, seeing as it was an anniversary edition. One of the people they had playing was a guy named Richie Havens. Richie was the opening act at the original Woodstock, and really became like the symbol of that whole generation, that whole movement. I'd interviewed Richie by phone before the show, and hooked up with him backstage, and we were sitting there chatting, and I had a young daughter at the time, and she was a little fidgety. And Richie Havens took her in his hands and started singing her lullabies to get her to go to sleep. Pretty cool memory, right?
Yeah,
it's like, that's worth the price of admission right there.
Yeah.
Molson Park, wonderful memories there.
Yeah. What about the Lollapalooza concerts? Were you shooting a lot of those as well?
Shot almost all of them.
Yeah. Now, you probably have a better memory as to the lineup of that. Do you recall a lot of the...
the one year Lollapalooza, there was Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Nine Inch Nails, Hole. Other years, there was Cypress Hill, there was George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars, there was Smashing Pumpkins, there was... Rage Against the Machine.
Incredible lineups.
It was the ultimate of the genres of that time.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd go in to see a show and you'd see, Rancid. And 2 bands later, you'd see Cypress Hill.
Yeah.
I mean, the mix of band and the mix of audience was just incredible, because I used to shoot a lot of the audience stuff as well, right? Because at that time there was a lot of surfing happening. And it was a cacophony of human emotions just bouncing all over the place. Some people were elated, some were terrified. You'd get caught in the wrong spot at the wrong time. The swell would come and you'd get thrown up on the stage. I mean, it was a great time. I mean, people were young, ambitious, a little bit crazy.
Speaking of that, when you're in the pit, your area, how dangerous can it be? Like, have you had incidences yourself where you've been and either getting hit by a security or lead singer booting you off the stage or other photographers?
Well, it's a pretty small space, right? It's just that at Molson Park, it was probably about 6 feet from the front of the stage to the fence where the audience is. So you've got a couple of burly security guys standing behind you. Molson Park, I think the worst I ever got was like a work boot in the back of the head during Lollapalooza. There was one year at Lollapalooza where somebody came up with the idea that if you left half to a third of the water in your water bottle, it made a great projectile, and you could throw it from a distance, right? If it's empty, it's just plastic, it floats. Too much, and you can't throw it very far. But if you put about a third in, you can actually whip it pretty good.
Oh, jeez.
And the first one came, I guess it would have been at the end of a really bad band set, and the audience showed their displeasure. And the first one came, and then there were like 5, 6 more. And then all of a sudden, it was like thousands, all at once. Just, you were pelted by water bottles from 30,000 people who decided that you sucked, right? And you hit underneath the stage, right? You just take cover and you hide. But yeah, I've got boots, T-shirts, all sorts of weird stuff's been thrown.
Crazy, crazy. Other than Molson Park, where else have you shot? Obviously, you were in the city quite a bit. We mentioned Maple Leaf Gardens earlier.
Sure, the Gardens, Sky Dome, C&E. C&E used to be a great place to shoot. The amphitheater downtown, a lot of the clubs in the city. Probably a lot of them have changed their names since then.
Most of them probably.
Probably, yeah. Places like the Diamond isn't anymore, I'm sure. And every venue was kind of different. It was interesting because when you worked at the paper, if you were shooting like one of the major global tours that were coming through the city, you kind of had a bit of an inside track because you could see what other photographers in previous cities were shooting. And that kind of gave you an inside track, and it made your job a little bit easier, right? Because if you were going off to shoot somebody like the Stones, it was always great in advance to know which side of the stage Mick was going to be on, and Keith would be on, and Ronnie would be on, and kind of what that stage would look like. Because in a lot of shows, when you came out from behind the stage ready to shoot, you were asked to take one side of the stage or the other, right? And that's where you camp out for the 3 or 4 songs that you were given. So if you were there and specifically your choice was to shoot Keith, for example, well, you wanted to set up on stage left, which would be the right looking at the stage, because he dominated the stage left space, whereas Ronnie would be on the other side. So if you were looking to shoot Keith and you were over on the wrong side, you had to have brought a fairly large lens with you, otherwise you weren't going to get the shots you were looking for. But working in the paper and seeing the advanced shots from other photographers of other shows, you knew kind of what the setup was. So that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah. I was going to ask too, do you have a relationship that you've built either with the band or with the promoter? Because I'm sure there must be some sort of, I'll call it behind the scenes politics or ways that you kind of get your face in as close as you can to the stage or whatever. Is there a lot of that going on? Do you build up a relationship, or do you, here's $20 kind of,
No, there was never graft.
I'm just kidding on that.
It really is. It's all relationship based, right? I got to meet, in the early days of Molson Park, the organization that did book the bands for them was a company called CPI, Concert Productions International. Well, CPI just happens to be one of the biggest promoters in the world. So not only were they doing shows at Molson Park, but they were also doing shows at Sky Dome and C&E and Winnipeg and California and Florida and Berlin and all around the world. They were the global touring company. So meeting the folks at Molson Park, they're the same people who are doing these other shows. So it was a case of meeting them and working with them and developing a good working relationship that it just opened the door to other shows. It was, we were doing a bunch of shows at Molson Park in a row, and they had something going on at the CNE a couple of weeks later. So the woman I dealt with, Barb Hoffman, I said, hey, Barb, would it be possible for me to come down and shoot this particular show? She said, absolutely, any shows you want, come on down. Love having you by. Great, and that really was the ticket. It opened the door to virtually every major act that came through Toronto or even within 100 kilometers of Toronto, right? It was based on relationships. And because of that, occasionally you got a little special opportunity that somebody else might not have. It's a pretty closed group to begin with. I mean, there's only, at any given time, I think, I probably would have been in the pit at major shows with maybe 7 or 8 other photographers, and that's it, right? It's not a big group of people, and it's even less today, I think. But back then, you'd get the occasional opportunity. I remember I was shooting the Stones at Skydome, and traditionally you shoot 1, 2, and 3, but the Stones have so much pyro in song 1 that you shoot 2, 3, and 4. So we'd finish shooting our 3 songs, and all the photographers were going out of the pit. And the woman who was working the tour said, hang out for a minute. Well, okay, sure. How many rolls of film did you bring? Told her. She said, how would you like to shoot the rest of the show alone? Yeah, I'd like that very much. She said, go ahead, it's yours. And I did. I got the chance to shoot the entire show by myself with nobody else.
Yeah,
so it was an entire show of images that nobody else is ever going to have them. And that kind of makes it pretty special. And just the fact that you developed a relationship that was that good, a working relationship with somebody, with an organization of that scale and on that stature, that they trust you enough to say, yeah, here you go, here are the keys to the Cadillac. Bring it home and don't bang it up. Right? And it's like, that's pretty cool.
Have you had bands actually contact you directly to work with them?
No, never.
Okay.
Never. That's never happened to me.
I guess it's they kind of go through different networks anyway. I'm sure with a lot of that, and to deal with all the photography and the PR work and all that other stuff.
And a lot of them, I think, probably went through their record companies, and their record companies had relationships with photographers, and a lot of the photographers for bands would have been determined by the art director of the album, right? When you look at a lot of the imagery that's associated with a band, it's normally associated with the band through an album. And that album is designed by an art director with a photographer, and they already have a fairly substantial list of photographers they deal with. Somebody like me who's working full-time for a newspaper, they'd probably just look and go, hey, he doesn't have time to do this anyways.
Yeah. The other day I was looking at a picture, and it was, I believe it was from the Wembley concert with Queen, and it was a picture of Freddie shot from behind, I guess, and it was a typical crowd shot. And then it was a picture beside it of everyone holding up cell phones to modern day concerts.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, how things change. Speaking of changing, though, how has technology changed from your point of view? When you, like you mentioned earlier, that when you're on one side of the stage and you got to shoot to the other, you've got these lenses you got to carry and everything else. How has technology changed to make your job that much easier?
I guess when you moved, I originally started, I was shooting film, right? It was good old-fashioned film. You'd have to roll film up in a dark room, create a spool and a canister, and then you'd weave it through the camera and you'd just shoot. I used manual cameras. I didn't use autofocus, so it was real old school. And it was just a matter of somebody processing the film and picking the shots. And today with digital, I shot the Tragically Hip back in 2013 with digital gear, and it was night and day. I mean, it really was. To think if I had the opportunity to shoot digital back in the day, the images would actually be pretty good, I think. Shooting digitally, it's just, everything from exposure to shutter speed is automatic, and it's autofocus and auto-corrected. It's incredible. It's like alchemy inside this little box, right? And it's just spectacular. And with some of the technology, you could transmit your digital photo from the venue, right? You could shoot it, hit a button, and it would be at the news desk.
Crazy.
within a minute and a half, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty amazing, especially compared to the Luddite world I come from. So yeah, technology, I'm sure, making it accessible. On the other side, everybody who shows up at a concert with their cell phone looking to grab an image, yeah, you'll get an image. It's not going to be, you won't be making it into a poster. Well, maybe you will. It'll be a pretty crappy poster,
Your own
but
poster.
Go ahead. I mean, cell phones, I think, are great for capturing memories and being a touchstone, but I think far too many people spend way too much time with those things up in the air and worrying about getting an image.
Instead of capturing the moment of the actual concert.
Yeah, live in the moment. Don't capture it,
Yeah.
right? Somebody's being paid to do that. Let them do it, right?
Yeah.
Guys like me that did that, right? When I did it, we were the only people with a camera, right? And I remember all the time getting audience members going, hey, can you send me a print? And they'd give you a card, right? Yeah, okay, depending on if you actually got a decent image. But now I think it kind of kills the moment. People aren't living in the moment. They're just capturing it, and it's all being posted to social for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that I was there to actually capture the stuff, yeah, I wouldn't have had a camera out. Rather get lost in the tunes than having to worry about that.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're shooting the bands, did you know or do some research on their movements or songs that you knew that you wanted to capture? Let's Mick Jagger, for instance. There are certain poses or
Right.
certain points where he's going to do certain things or whatever. Did you do your homework on that, or are you shooting like a zillion shots and kind of hope for the best?
That's pretty much it.
Is it okay?
The latter of the two.
Yeah.
It's just, you go down and you're armed with 7, 8, 10 rolls of 36 exposure, right? And you're shooting as fast as you can. Somebody like Jagger, I mean, he's all over the stage. The guy doesn't stop. At any time, he could be in front of you, and 30 seconds later, he's 100 yards out on a platform, right? He's just always in motion. There are certain essence shots, I think, is the best way of describing it. You describe it as a color shot, an atmosphere shot that you're kind of looking for. Shooting Pink Floyd, for example, we weren't allowed to be any closer than the mixing board, which is halfway back. So you're that far away, so you've got to think, well, how can I create an image that actually captures Pink Floyd, right? So it ended up, the image I used was a landscape shot where it was edge to edge was the stage. And the idea was to capture how big it was, and with all this audience in front of it. Particular songs, you really don't worry about that because you don't know what you're going to get, because you're going to get the first 3 songs, right? You don't really have a choice. There are times, though, that you're at certain shows and you've talked to other photographers, you're talking to them in front of the band before the show starts, and they may have shot them previously, so you'll get a little bit of an insight. For example, we were shooting Judas Priest at the C&E, and the stage is pretty elaborate, and they've got this huge skull. It's probably about 12 feet high, and the drum kit's on top of it. And as the show starts, you can hear a motorcycle in the background, and it's the lead singer, Halford, on the bike, revving it up, getting ready to come out. And when he comes out, the jaw of the skull opens up, and he pops the clutch, and he comes out on a motorcycle. Well, this particular show, he popped the clutch a little too soon. He comes out, the jaw hasn't opened yet, completely, and he smacks his head onto the steel beam, out like a light, out cold, knocks himself right out. The whole band just keeps playing, right? Like nobody even notices. It's like, boom, 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 boom. He's laying there, out cold. I'm shooting it. And the motorcycle came about 10 feet in front of us, right? This stopped. So I'm shooting it, and then you can see the roadies dragging this guy off the stage. Funny, I feel bad for the guy. He was fine. He came back out and he performed. But in the moment, that's a pretty Spinal Tap sort of thing, and it's worth a pretty good laugh, right? As I came out of the pit, there was a fellow from that band's record company there. And he very generously offered me whatever I wanted for that roll of film, just so that we wouldn't publish it. And he said, how much do you want? I don't want anything. This is great. This is a once in a lifetime. Are you kidding? This is hilarious. Got back, processed the film, and sure enough, you can see what I thought you could see. We never published it, right? It's a great story, but you'd never do that to somebody. Maybe telling the story, I guess, kind of did, but
yeah.
Oh well. I won't show you the image, but yeah, it was just one of those things. That's the only time that I've had something like that happen. But yeah, you know that at certain shows you're going to get weird things, just that are Spinal Tap moments. And even when I shot Spinal Tap, there were no Spinal Tap moments, which was really kind of odd. That was the real irony of Spinal Tap.
Yeah, it's cool. We talked a lot about the photography side, but we didn't really talk too much about the journalistic side of it. Were you doing a lot of interviews as well as photography? I knew you were back in the Examiner days, of course, but did you continue that afterwards as well with the interviews, et cetera? And what was your best memory of some of your interviews? Photography. Doing the journalism part, it was really fortunate actually. Working at the Examiner, working at a small paper, was great because it was everything that I wanted. Right, I got to write because I interviewed the performers. I got to do great photography because I had access to them, and I got access to the best venues in the world, really, or at least in Canada, here in Toronto. And it was. If you worked at a big paper like The Star, you were either a writer or a photographer. You never had the chance to do both, and you'd have an editor who assigned you stuff. I was the editor, so I picked whatever I wanted. So really, it was like a kid in a candy store, right? I got to pick whatever I wanted to cover, and I got to interview whoever I wanted to interview. And if they were playing at Molson Park, basically there was an interview available because we were the local paper, and generally the rule of media relations is you give the artist to the local paper, right? The venue, the local venue. So when you'd get people, or shows like Lollapalooza come up here, I had a backstage pass to where the artists were, and I just wandered around. I chatted with whoever I wanted, right? I'd normally be introduced by one of the record company reps. And we could sit there and we'd chat. If it was on the record, it was on the record. If it wasn't, it wasn't. 99 times out of 100, it wasn't on the record because it was backstage. And not like today. I mean, my job wasn't paparazzi, right? I had a real paycheck from a legitimate news gathering organization. I didn't have to be a paparazzi. So when we were backstage and we were having these conversations, the thought never occurred to me to pull out a camera and start surprise photographing these guys. It was like, no, we have a relationship. I want it to continue, so I'm going to respect your privacy backstage, and whatever you do back here is between you, me, and the wall. I don't care and I'm not telling anybody about it, so don't worry. Right? Well, thank you very much, Wayne. It's a sheer pleasure.
Well,
so
thanks,
great to
Ian.
catch up with you, and let's do it again sometime.
I'd love to.
Minus the camera.
I'd love to.
Take care.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.